All right. Again, welcome everyone to our webinar about photojournalism, best practices for the digital age. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Katja Ritterbusch. I'm president of SPJ Georgia. Before we kick this off and I hand over to Benjamin, let me say just a few words about SPJ for those of you who are not familiar with the organization. The Society of Professional Journalists is the oldest organization and broadest organization representing journalists in the United States, founded in 1909. Our Georgia chapter isn't quite as old. We've turned 11 this year. SPJ has three main missions. Number one is First Amendment rights. Number two is ethical journalism. I'm sure you all heard about the Code of Ethics, which has become a standard in most newsrooms in the US today. And number three is education for student journalists, early career journalists, veteran journalists, really all communication professionals, but also the public. We do a lot of media literacy programs as well. And we offer diverse programming from webinars like we're doing today, a lot of in-person events, panels, forums, workshops, and also networking events where we partner with other organizations. And now let me introduce you to our moderator tonight. Benjamin Grady is at-large director at SPJ Georgia. He's a journalist by training, a graduate of Oglethorpe University. I've heard he's taken some classes from Christina. Benjamin works currently as a communications specialist for the Association County Commissioners of Georgia. I hope I didn't mess up that name. Is that correct?
No, that's okay. That's
okay.
Yes.
Benjamin also enjoys photography, has studied photography, enjoys it in his free time, and his specialties are landscape, portraits, and street photography. So this guy knows what he's talking about. Benjamin, please take it from here.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate it, Katja. Thank you all once again, and thank you, Katja, for introducing me this evening. I'm really excited to just talk about photojournalism, specifically in the digital age, best practices. We're just going to be focusing on the ethics, of course, talking about visual storytelling and the importance of inclusion. So I have the pleasure of being joined tonight by four panelists. My first panelist I'd like to introduce is Matthew Pearson. He has worked as a dedicated visual journalist at Wave, as Atlanta's NPR member station affiliate for the past 3 years. So in college, Matthew wrote for the Independent Alligator before changing his major to political science and diving headfirst into work for organizations in the political and nonprofit advocacy realms. He is very passionate about the work that he does and making an impact in his local community. His hobbies, especially when it comes to photography, he takes it very seriously because he sees photography as an instrument to inform his neighbors about the world around them. And Matthew's favorite thing, or what he loves about photography, is how he is able to tell a story in ways that his writing often cannot. My second panelist that I'm joined with this evening, sorry, give me 1 second. So my screen froze. My second panelist is Alyssa Pointer. She is a visual storyteller based in Atlanta. She earns her Bachelor of Arts in Photojournalism and African American Studies from Western Kentucky University in 2016. And she established herself in the field working as a staff multimedia journalist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So, of course, that's based here in Georgia. In 2024, she joined Thomson Reuters for 6 months as a video journalist, where she traveled the East Coast covering breaking news, extreme weather, and the 2024 presidential election. She serves on the board of the National Association of Black Journalists as a visual task force and the Atlanta Photojournalism Seminar. And she also currently leads her creative ventures at Leola Studios, I pronounced that properly, a company that's named after her grandmother, and it focuses on providing storytelling, imagery, for news agencies, profit and nonprofit businesses. My third panelist that I'm joined with this evening is Dylan Wilson. Dylan Wilson is both a photographer and an educator based in Augusta, Georgia, at Augusta University. He has an undergraduate, or he has two undergraduate degrees, excuse me, in photojournalism and in film from the University of Georgia, and a master's in photography from Savannah College Art and Design. His work regularly appears in the New York Times, the Daily Mail, and the New York Post. And as I previously said, he works as an educator at Augusta University, which I think is really important because, you know, having people who have both worked in the field and having that perspective of somebody who understands how photojournalism is supposed to be taught really allow us to have a broad perspective and a variety of perspectives for what we're going to be discussing tonight. My final panelist, and this is a real pleasure for me, is Christina Price Washington. She holds a Master of Fine Arts in Photography and a Master of Arts in Art History from Georgia State University. Her work has been exhibited at venues including the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, including underexposed women photographers from the collection, slow exposures from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Georgia. There's rising movers and shakers of the Georgia arts scene. In 2017, her photographs were featured in On Paper, curated by Leslie Jones. Her work is in the permanent collection of the High Museum and in private collections across the United States and Europe. And she is based in Atlanta, where she teaches photography at Oglethorpe University, which happens to be my alma mater. So I'm very pleased to present our panelists tonight. And as I discussed, we have our three sections where the first one we're focusing on ethics, truth, and digital manipulation. So the key topics for this section are going to be focusing on the integrity that comes with visual reporting, the consent, privacy, and dignity of subjects, and of course, just navigating bias and agenda in visual storytelling. So to kick things off, my first question is going to be on focusing like what are the ethical lines that should be considered when using images for your story? And for this question, I'm going to first call on Dylan Wilson.
Thanks, Benjamin. It's wonderful to see you all. I'm kind of reminded of COVID times, but I talk about ethics a lot to my students, and I want to ask you guys. First of all, what are ethics, and why are ethics important? Somebody shout it out. Summer, Anna, Arvin, Dean, Elijah. Somebody tell me what ethics are and why they're important. Anybody? Benjamin, what are ethics?
I'll go ahead and answer that for you, Dylan. Ethics are basically the guidelines that are going to be established for helping us navigate how we should move about in life, especially when we're focusing on photography. They're basically going to serve as the guidelines, the reasoning and logic that we should apply when, doing the practice of photojournalism.
Yeah, so ethics are this code that we live by. That code could be religion. It could be just a personal feeling that you have within yourself. But in photography, we get words to tell us what is ethical and what is not ethical. And I'm going to read from the National Press Photographer Association's Code of Ethics. It says, "Do not manipulate images or add or alter sound in any way that can mislead viewers or misrepresent subjects. Don't pay sources or subjects or reward them materially for information or participation. Do not accept gifts, favors, or compensation from those who might seek to influence coverage." Now, what does all that mean? Why should we abide by this code? And as journalists, the reason that we should behave ethically is because the only reason that the public has to trust us is that we have not lied to them. And when we make mistakes as journalists, we are honest and we are upfront and we correct those mistakes because our passion as journalists is truth. And if we are out there spreading mistruths or not correcting mistruths, we are not doing our job. And so when I think about photography, there are some ethical situations that come to my mind immediately. The first one is staging, then photo manipulation, misrepresentation, physically altering a scene, and then this like bigger question of, should we take a picture or should we not take a picture? And I can run through these briefly. Staging is, in my opinion, one of the most common ethical situations that you are going to come into as a photographer. Because when you come to a scene, when you come to a subject, what's the first question that they always ask you? It's, what do you want me to do? And as journalists, we don't want you to do anything. We want you to exist, to be out in your world, and we want to document that world. And, you know, obviously just our physical presence, the presence of the camera, it alters things, but that's minutia. It's neither here nor there. Mainly, I'm not going to tell you to do something, and I don't want you to do something for my benefit. I think back to an assignment I took I had very early in my photographic career. I was photographing a guy who was running for mayor. And when I got there, he asked me, what do you want me to do? And I said, I don't want you to do anything. I just want to hang out and make some pictures with you. And he says, okay, well, let's go hang up this sign. I said, sure, we'll go hang up the sign. We walk outside, he's got the sign, he holds it up in the air, pretends like he's hammering it in, and turns around, looks at me and says, did you get it? And I said, yep. And he pulled the sign down and he walked back inside and said, thanks, I'll see you later. And I got back to the office and I told my editor, I said, look, these are what the pictures look like, but we can't use these. This is fake. This was all staged. This was done for me. And the editor, called back the subject. I think he kind of blamed me. He said, the photos didn't turn out well or something. I mean, it wasn't malicious, but it was an excuse to get me back with the subject and to make a picture that was more honest. So the second picture that I made was, him talking on the phone or something. It was more boring, but it was more honest. And that was what was important to me. Photo manipulation seems pretty obvious when I talk about it. And when I talk about my students, we look at early examples of photo manipulation. We look at more current examples of photo manipulation. But photo manipulation is wild, and it's only going to get worse. If you look at the things that AI can do just in the native Photoshop app, it's insane. So I would tell you that the easiest way to get fired from any journalism job is to manipulate a photo. Do something unethical, add something to the scene, subtract something from the scene. We look at images from Alan Dietrich at the Toledo Blade. And these were, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And he removed things from photographs that were very small, that were just footnotes in the photograph. But by him doing that, he sets this precedent where his pictures are not the truth. His pictures are lying to the audience. And that is the greatest sin that you can commit as a photojournalist, I think. Also, we look at the Newsweek and the Time covers of O.J. Simpson, where both covers show the same images, but Time's cover has been significantly darkened. It casts OJ in a darker light and a more evil light, and honestly, a more racist light as well. And you can't do that ethically. When I talk about misrepresentation of a scene, really things that I'm thinking about is, what are we putting in that little rectangle and what are we leaving out of that little rectangle? It's easy to crop important context out of a photograph by just turning your camera, or by using a longer lens, for instance, to create compression in your photo. But we want to be truthful with what we with what we capture. And finally, physically altering a scene. There's a great photo from the French and Crimean War, a very famous one called Valley of the Shadow of Death. And it's made by a photographer, Roger Fenton. And this was at a time when shutter speeds were very, very slow on cameras. So you don't get action that, you know, shows armies fighting the way that we have photographs now. So what you got were images that showed the results. It's a contemporary term we call late photography. It's a genre of photography that I really like. But in this photograph, Valley of the Shadow of Death, Fenton comes upon this road that's littered with cannonballs. And he looks at it and he looks at the composition. It's a lovely composition with lines and rules of third, and it looks really great. But he decides that it doesn't accurately portray the destruction that happened on that site. So he goes and he grabs a bunch more cannonballs and he moves them into the scene to create an image that, you know, he thinks more accurately tells the story of the destruction that happened there. This is an ethical violation. We can't add or subtract things from a scene. It creates an untruth. Now, Fenton is working in a different time and he's working more in metaphor, just generally. But if you or I were to do this as working journalists, that would be grounds for immediate termination. I shot a job when I was a young journalist, actually in Atlanta on the Silver Comet Trail, and it was a memorial bicycle ride for a woman who had been killed on the trail. And I watched as a still photographer picked up a sign that said, you know, notice there'll be large crowds here for this memorial. And she turned the sign around so that she could have the sign in the foreground and have the cyclists in the background. That's an ethical violation. You can't do that. That's physically altering the scene. My passion for ethics was really stirred by my photojournalism professor when I was an undergrad. But you know, since I've been teaching, we had a news crew come in and talk about a story that they did where there was a doctor who was a pedophile abusing children in his practice. And so to illustrate this story, the video journalist printed out his mugshot and stapled it to a telephone pole and then used rack focus to have the mugshot and the house or the building in the background. And they talked about how powerful this image was. And all I could think about was, this is an ethical violation. You can't do this as journalists. And I made sure to question them on this because to me, that's something that is very wrong, and it is creating an untruth with our images. But I think probably the most interesting ethical thing to talk about is this idea of, when do we shoot pictures and when do we help? When do we run away? When do we do something else? And I always show my students Kevin Carter's Pulitzer Prize winning photograph of a young child in Sudan, a young famished child in Sudan, who's kind of crumpled in the fetal position in the foreground, and there's a vulture kind of looming in the background, just watching this child. And it's a very powerful image. I mean, Kevin Carter won a Pulitzer Prize, but the backlash and the public reaction from that image was such that he later committed suicide. He committed suicide actually before he even won that Pulitzer Prize. So what is our duty as journalists and as humans in that situation? There's another one from a newspaper that I used to work at, the New York Post, where a man is about to be struck by a subway train. And the headline is, in great New York Post fashion, "Pushed on the subway track. This man is about to die, doomed." It's very dramatic, and it shows the moments right before this man's death. It's something, you know, akin to a Robert Capa Spanish militiaman or an Eddie Adams Viet Cong general photograph. But what's our duty as humans and as journalists where do we pick up the camera? Where do we put down the camera? And I think that's something that is a really interesting thing, and I think that we should discuss that more. And I think that it blends nicely into news topics that are going on right now with protests. I haven't covered a protest in quite a while. I covered protest in New York. I covered George W. Bush protests when I was a young journalist, which shows how long ago that was. But I am told that protesters now will ask to not be photographed because they fear for their safety, and I understand that. But as journalists, we of course want to minimize harm. I think that's in the SPJ code of ethics. But we as journalists should not have a duty to protect anyone. We shouldn't protect protesters and we shouldn't protect cops. That's not our duty. And when you go into an assignment, at least it's my opinion, when you go into an assignment with the intent of protecting one side over the other, that's when you lose your objectivity as a journalist. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about ethics and ethical situations. It's something that I have spent a lot of my career studying and talking about. Have any discussion, any questions? Anybody else want to add anything so I can shut up?
I have a question. So when talking about manipulation, first I'm thinking of as Photoshop and everything. So say you take a picture of a subject, but in the photo you have like an elbow or something, and then you just Photoshop that out. Is that considered manipulation if it doesn't necessarily add to the photo or take away from it? It might just be something that it was in the way of the subject that you were taking.
So like there's an elbow like covering the subject or something?
Just like say it's Brian Kemp and he's up at the podium, and
Right.
there's someone kind of in front, and they have a mic or something, and it's a little bit obstructing the photo itself. Is it wrong to crop the photo closer?
Oh no. Well,
or to edit out?
okay. So like manipulation and photoshopping, we kind of abide by these. If you couldn't do it in a dark room, then you shouldn't do it digitally. And cropping is something that we could absolutely do in a dark room. I mean, you're cropping, the story is Brian Kemp, not the person's elbow. And so if you're cropping for impact, you're helping to tell the story, and that's absolutely okay. What would be not okay is if you went in with the clone stamp and you removed the guy's elbow, or you lassoed it and you typed in remove. That would not be okay. Even though you could make a great argument that it doesn't alter the image, it's not okay because you are lying to your viewers when you do that.
So like a dark room approach, so lightening a photo, or darkening a photo.
Yeah, I'm pretty old school and I'm pretty like bad at things, but when I import a photo into Lightroom, I hit auto and then I change my white balance, and I might tweak the exposure slider a little bit, and then I crop and then like export FTP,
Okay.
like done. But also I'm lazy too, so.
That sounds good to me.
But I mean, I worked for companies doing PR and doing advertising, and like we do tons and tons of photo manipulation. I worked for the Savannah College of Art and Design, and if I showed you the before and after photographs of their dorm, you would want to go to school there. So yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Excellent. That was excellent, Dylan. Thank you for that. Thank you for opening us up, just talking about the ethics. I want to add an additional question to that. And I'm gonna actually call on Matthew for this. How do you ensure, because you just gave us a breakdown of the ethical lines and the things to consider, Dylan, when it comes to how to go about doing photojournalism. So, Matthew, for this question, still focusing on ethics and truth as well as digital manipulation, how do you ensure your work? And when I say your, I'm not necessarily saying yours, but you're welcome to go ahead and pull from your examples, but more so general second person your. How do you ensure your work maintains journalistic integrity, especially in an age where we're just talking about distrust and manipulation?
That's a big question. I really love, I was smiling and nodding when Dylan was just talking about how he processes photos, and mine is almost identical in the sense of just clicking that auto button, kind of cropping it down and moving on. Well, the way I approach it when I'm behind the camera is my goal is to not have to touch that photo at all once it gets onto my computer and move on. So I'm trying to keep that in mind of doing it all on the camera and keeping it controlled in that way. When we're talking about manipulation in the sense of physical manipulation while you're out on the scene, I've had experiences similar to Dylan's where I've gone somewhere and they were like, well, what do you want me to do? And the first thing I say is like, pretend I'm not here. Like, I do not exist. Whatever you were going to be about to do, I'm going to find a way to make that image and try to show it in an accurate and also creative way to do it. And just establishing that as soon as I get on the scene with a subject about storytelling, that how limited we choose to be because we want to create an honest image, and when it comes to knowing about when it comes to photoshopping and digital manipulation and stuff like that, I haven't even taught myself those skills. I don't know how to use Photoshop in that kind of way. I don't know what the lasso tool and the cloning and kind of the cleaning those photos up in that kind of way. When I decided I was going to pursue photojournalism as my photography choice, I made an intentional choice to not learn how to use those skills. That might hurt me in the future if I move away from photojournalism and try to do some other kind of photography, because I'm sure that will be a steep learning curve. But I don't know, maybe AI will be able to do that all for me in that field when I'm allowed to do it all that way. But those two other things are the really coming to mind that really kind of guide me on that. I just want to build off of what Dylan was talking about and just jumping away from your question a little bit about covering protests, because back in a few months ago during the newest King Day, during the No Kings protest, I was up at Chambly Tucker when it got violent and the police started throwing tear gas, and I ended up getting kettled into a back corner of a gas station lot with a bunch of protesters were pinned against the fence, and a lot of them were trying to jump over the fence and drop down 10, 15 feet to get away from the gas, to get away from the police. There was a woman in front of me that's screaming, panicking, hyperventilating because she's so scared. And she sees me taking photos while I'm also looking around to check my safety, to check on my reporter and all those things. And she starts screaming at me, why don't you just stop and help me? Why are you making photos? Or why are you taking photos? Put your camera down and start helping me. And in that moment, I was faced with that ethical dilemma of what I do. And I replied to her like, this is how I can help. This is what my job is and what my duty is to record what's happening to you and what's happening around us in this violence. And I didn't say it in that clean of a way because it was chaotic what's happening. But that's the process that was going through my brain, was thinking about, in that moment, is she truly in danger? Is her life actually threatened? Do I need to put my camera down and help her? If not, if she's just experiencing something really uncomfortable that is not yet to the place of being some way that that would cause harm for her, in that moment, my job is to still make photographs and to document what's happening. And that was a really tough, awkward thing to do in that moment, but that's what we're called to do, is to document that history, to witness it. And that's the only way that we can do our job, is by keeping our eyes open during those really tough moments and keeping our lens on it.
And Matthew, I think that like a lot of those times, it presents a danger to us were we to try to help. No photograph is worth losing your life over. And in the same way, if you are, I think about the man on the subway train. If the photographer were to go and try to grab him off the tracks, they risk losing their life as well. And you're in a situation where, yeah, I think making pictures is that's what you can do in that situation.
Yeah, I always joke with my editor about how I know I'm doing a good job when she gives me a call and goes, "Hey, you need to back up. You need to get away right now." But that's also how my brain is wired in those situations is you just pick up your photo, you just pick up your camera and you do what you do. And there's so many photos that I have. And one of the examples that I have that we'll talk about later in the next section is one of those incidences of I didn't even think about what danger I was in, or I didn't realize how dangerous it was in or how chaotic it was in until afterwards when I'm processing the photos and beginning to file and being like, oh my word, like I was photographing while all this was happening around me. Yeah.
It's very insightful, Matthew.
We have a quick question here before we move too far away from the manipulation. We have a very practical question from Helen in the chat, and she asks, please give me a guideline to share with students on the difference between posing a person versus staging a plated dish with a wine glass and silverware. They always ask. So can you chime in?
Yeah, well, Matthew, I can, you know, if we're staging a person, the only time as journalists that we're able to do that is in a portrait situation. It needs to be labeled it's a portrait. In the cut line, that needs to be apparent, because we can never assume that our audience would just know that this was a portrait. You know, Dylan Wilson posed for a portrait. In his bedroom on, you know, whatever, make your cut line that. So that's when you would pose a person or stage a person. Otherwise, you don't want to do that. If you're photographing a plate of food, I mean, a plate of food is like, it's a plate of food. It's not moving anywhere. You want it to look nice. I mean, then that's where you kind of think about aesthetics. You know, we would do food reviews and restaurant reviews for the newspaper. You'd come in, you'd get a plate of food, you'd photograph it. Now, the bigger ethical question comes in after when you're 19 years old and you're starving. Do you eat that plate of food or do you allow the restaurant to throw it away? If you're following the MPPA guidelines, you don't eat the food, you don't accept that gift. I've been that 19-year-old, I've been starving, and it's really hard to you know, allow that to happen, but ethically that is what we should do. And Helen, text back and let us know if that answered the question.
Thank you, Dylan. We appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and move us over to the second section since we hit our 20-minute mark for the first section. Thank you for the strong opening from both Matthew and Dylan. This second section, we're going to talk about visual storytelling, and the key topics are going to be talking about the narrative composition of photo, what makes the stories engaging across the platforms, and balancing the visual impact with accuracy. So for this, I would like to call on Ms. Christina Price-Washington. And I have like a two-part question. So the first question is, what makes photo story resonate, especially when we're talking about the digital media environment? And do you have a photo that you can share that, you know, captures this idea of having an image that resonates in the digital media first environment, focusing, of course, on the breakdown of what makes that photo so good?
Okay, hi, thank you for having me all. Well, in terms of answering your question right now, Ben, I am actually chose two images that are deeply steeped in optical photography, where digital photography was not really on the horizon yet. So maybe I should share my screen to talk about them.
Yes, please feel free.
And then I will talk about the visual storytelling and the effects it has. Hold on a second, let me share. I have to do them one by one. So I start out here with Dorothea Lange's migrant mother. 1 second, let me just move a few things. All right, here we go. So an iconic image, an image that belongs to everybody in America. It is in the Library of Congress because Dorothea Lange was photographing it as an assignment for the Farm Security Administration. So in a way, what makes visual storytelling in this photograph impactful is possibly the emotional depth that Dorothea Lange embeds into this photograph. We do understand the context in which Dorothea Lange was working, and therefore the image in itself becomes kind of the cultural event or the icon of the cultural event of the Depression of the 1930s. And I think a big impact about what this photograph portrays is that this is possibly one of the advocates, well, one of many advocates that initiated social change or is also a part of initiating social change further on. You know, this photograph is a very, has a lot of empathy, or I think maybe Dorothea Lange shows a lot of empathy with this photograph because she kind of has a relationship with the subjects in the photograph. And now talking about manipulation very quickly, this photograph is cropped. Students of mine know I teach usually photographs. If you want to have something, you have to go up to it. So there is a no cropping policy in my courses because I find that is kind of a little bit manipulation. I understand all the other speakers what they're saying, but in terms of what you see, you have to go to it to get it is kind of important. That's at least what I'm instilling when I teach, and I think as a photographer, whether it's a photojournalist or any photographer, it's very important to build trust with your subjects. Any early street photographer, you know, the way you go out, you make a photograph and you return to bring a to return and you bring a print, you know, as a token of, you know, reliability and trust, and you develop a kind of a rapport with your subjects, and that kind of also gives you a sense of respectability. So in terms of ethical considerations in this photograph, I think it is really important that Dorothea Lange is acknowledging the dignity of her subjects and gives them autonomy. I think it's very important to think about who's taking the photograph of whom, who's speaking for somebody, or are you speaking for somebody? And I think that's a very difficult, well, challenging thing to navigate within making a photograph, especially if you're photographing subjects, in this case, where you have a social differences, people of need, you know, that is a very careful balance of keeping your photograph ethically true, and again with this kind of trust and exercising and depicting humanity. It becomes kind of a shared humanity, possibly. So I think, I don't know, I know it's a very iconic photograph. Everybody knows this photograph, but at the same time, it's, I think, a very powerful photograph, and I always find students very interested in seeing that that there is actually a third child in there, and students don't, if they know, they have to really look for it. And you know, there's a lot of story, history, and actually a conversation a viewer possibly has with this photograph itself. Let me wait a second. Where's my stop sharing. I'm gonna go to the other photograph.
Okay.
1 second. Sorry, I have to switch around. So the other photograph I'm sharing is it's a very iconic photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson, who coined the decisive moment. I had a very interesting conversation yesterday with a student who wrote in a reflection piece that he learned to make sure everything is kind of set up and then take a photograph versus holding the finger on the button of a digital camera. And I went like, oh, okay. So it was time to introduce the idea of the decisive moment, that you really are becoming that you anticipate your environment, and that you're having some kind of interiority. We actually notice things around you. And so this kind of concept is, I think, very, very important, because I think there is a sense of the idea of a truth in there, because you can't impossibly manipulate a photograph in that moment. So, to show as a photographer that you have intuition and timing and understand composition to make an impactful photograph is, something that has to be practiced, I'm sure. And the storytelling in this photograph is, I would say, through the movements. The man is making a leap right before he enters or touches the water, and kind of making this photograph in a way a kind of a dynamic element. It's not so much it is about this moment, but there is kind of the idea of transition and uncertainty, and in this photograph that is beyond just this decisive moment, or this, you read a photograph in a way that you think you understand. I think a photograph that keeps questions open are much more ambiguous, and therefore much more interesting, because you really have to kind of think about what the photograph actually offers. So I think having patience and being able to observe and letting the world unfold in front of you, I think, is something kind of something we all have to probably practice more. So can you ask your question one more time, Ben?
Absolutely. So, you've already, of course, shown the photo that, exemplifies this idea of resonating with an audience. So, like, my initial question was talking about what makes a photo story resonate in a digital first media environment, especially when you're just focusing on the visual impact with accuracy. I know you talked on the decisive moment too. I thought that was really important. I'm glad you touched on that too, because I remember that was a talking point you had discussed in your class when it comes to, taking a photo that, is able to resonate with the audience. So like again, the question, what makes a photo resonate in a digital first media environment?
Yeah, I think it doesn't whether it's optical or digital photography. I think it is the same. It is the same recipe. You have
Right.
to be truthful. You have to have rapport with your subjects, and you have to be ethical about being authentic, giving the subjects authenticity, and don't speak for them. And I think most importantly, maybe to not build stereotypes or shoot or look for stereotypes, because that reinforces, what we already know. So, yeah, teaching in the digital world, I think teaching digital literacy is really important, and becoming more and more importanter, as I'd like to say. So in terms of maybe visual storytelling techniques, I would always still say, if you want to photograph something, you have to come closer to it. And then I would also advise everybody, novice or not, that you fill the frame responsibly and understand what is actually the main subject of your photograph, and don't leave a lot of negative space that's actually not warranted, because your subject maybe is this big and the photograph is this big. So again, go closer and frame correctly. For students, I see all the time, if people are using, if people are using a phone as a tool, which is fine. I think it's super important that wipe the lenses, because, I always say your photograph look like as if you have mayonnaise on your eyes because of the slime and from your fingerprints, whatever, right? So those are all things I think really important. I think those are like details. We all need to be very, I'm trying to make my students aware of those things. And yeah, so any other questions maybe I can answer?
Do we have any questions for anybody in the audience? Any questions for Christina? Okay. And that's fine too, because we still have plenty of time for the other sections. Go ahead, Dylan. I saw you unmuted.
Well, Christina, I have an ethical question for you. In the migrant mother photograph, there's been lots of writing about, her name is Florence. I forget her last name, but Florence is her first name. She regretted that she never received any money or any aid, even though she became quite famous, or her picture, her face became quite famous due to Dorothea Lange's photograph. Ethically, where do we stand, or what is our duty as journalists in situations like that?
Yeah, I think in the moments where somebody or a body profits, but the subject does not, I think that is a very big ethical dilemma. So I do not really know how to answer this question. I think maybe I have a feeling you or the other journalists have much more in-depth thought about this.
I don't think that there is a good answer, but I think that it's a question that we as visual storytellers need to be asking ourselves. What is the impact of our pictures, and are we photographing in a way where we're being empathetic to our audience, which is exactly what you talked about. And I think Dorothea Lange does that really well. In her journal, she talks about driving past and then coming back and making the pictures. And she only made a few pictures that day. But yeah, it's how do we photograph with empathy? How do we tell our subject's story? And these are all things that are really important that we think about as journalists. Our subjects might not ever see some financial gain. The subject of Migrant Mother didn't, and she was angry about it. But I don't think that that's our position as journalists. Our job is to make the public aware, not to, we're not trying to make her rich. We're not rich. I'm very poor.
I don't know if I remember correctly, but maybe there was some kind of funds raised at the end of her life for covering some medical bills. Possibly, it's been a while. I don't know. But honestly, I don't know. Was the photograph of the migrant mother at the end a fluke that it became so famous? That is. It could have been another one too. I don't know, right? So I think, yeah, it is a little bit of a problem. The thing is that the Library of Congress did not profit from it. The history profited from it. So there's not a financial gain, so to speak, except, that maybe the Library of Congress has the responsibility and stewardship of that photograph, right? So I don't know. And I think the question is maybe at this point more important than the answer. Because I think the dialogue is constantly changing about that, because our environment is constantly changing, and we have to consider how to approach a possibility like this. Your example with Roger Fenton's photograph, how he changed, the cannonball layout in Crimea, is the language wasn't there for ethical photography, right? So in hindsight, going back is easier than how do we deal with this now, because we can't look forward, right? So there's always this, the problem will probably arise tomorrow more about what's happening now. So I don't know. Yeah.
Alyssa, do you have something to?
Yeah, I was going to just jump in and say this is a great question. Working at a newspaper, I was in the environment where someone was her quote and her image was used for a story. And the question of could you put my GoFundMe in the story was raised. And then there was a conversation about that. And I think talking about where we are now today in this arena, I personally think if the GoFundMe was already created, then it doesn't hurt to add it, because I know that WSB TV has a whole, I still watch the news. I'm an old millennial. I know WSB TV has a whole section on their website where this is where you find the person's GoFundMe. Personally, I think that's okay if it was already created, not let me create this because this is happening, right? This person had experienced a natural disaster and they had already had this up. I personally didn't think it was a problem. The reporter kind of was like, in this ethical dilemma, like, well, we're not here to, set a precedent that we do this. But I've also heard from other journalists in other arenas where it's like, we are in an exchange working at an organization. We are exchanging things. You are giving me the opportunity to talk to you, to photograph you. And in exchange, I could understand, I just think it's an exchange. Like, it's a relationship that is happening. And so I'm not saying in every instance that it should be done. I just think in certain situations, I understand that that's happening. Because in the same sense, when a first responder is killed in the line of duty, 9 times out of 10, without question, the media is going to post, this person's GoFundMe is here and they've raised $1 million. So I understand both sides, but I just wanted to throw that in there, that in this day and age now where people are experiencing issues and people are more willing to help, if it has been created, I understand throwing it in there just to say, hey, this is a fact. They created a GoFundMe page.
Yeah, I love that. Where my brain went, because this is one of the first times I've actually thought about this question, and I kind of giggled at it because I work for a nonprofit newsroom. Most of my professional career has been in nonprofit, so I'm never thinking about making money off of what I'm doing. I'm thinking about serving the community and doing my job. The issue that I have run into when it comes to this about people monetizing in a digital first world off of my images is, I cover a lot of politics. I've covered a lot of protest, and I've seen those images after they've been published taken off our website and used by a social media account to then fundraise for a political cause or for something else. So I have Google Alerts set up for my name. So all my name's in the metadata. It's also just, usually sometimes they'll credit you, sometimes they won't. And if I catch someone doing that, if that comes across and there's alert for that, reaching out and like explaining, what that is. And, we've never had to get lawyers involved in that, because usually once you mention it, they're like, okay, I'll back off and like apologize for it. But that's something that I am very vigilant about after my work has been published through WAB, where there's no paywall. It's accessible to everyone. That's our mission as a public service institution, to do that, is to make sure that my images are only being used as a public service and not for any other cause.
I mean, I think this is exactly where visual literacy is becoming more and more important. An example that, that these are things that need to be actively engaged, taught, daily, because of those kind of situations. Because I have a feeling the way you told the story right now, Matthew, it sounds more like people do it not understanding what they're actually doing. So again, there's this knowledge gap.
Yeah, there's been, definitely incidents where it was just a knowledge gap and they didn't understand what the rights were around that and what the intention was around that. Sometimes it was just some communications intern being lazy for a political party and just Googling and finding the first image and stuff. And that happens too. And those are the ones that usually own up to it pretty fast and move off of it and are, it's just embarrassing for them to be caught that way,
It's very embarrassing, Matthew.
Yeah.
I just want to also that I'm glad that we were able to start with talking about visual literacy, and then we were able to have each of our journalists, panelists, be able to go ahead and add the journalism into the photography to serve as the bridge, because this really is a sort of question that doesn't have a definite answer, and it's in constant discussion, especially in a digital first media environment. So I really appreciate each of you being able to provide your perspectives for this section. I'm going to go ahead and move it to the third section because we have hit our 20-minute mark for this one. And so for the final section, we're really just going to talk about representation, inclusion, and responsibility. And I'm actually going to call on Alyssa Pointer for this one. My first question is kind of a combination of two questions, but the first focus of this question that I'm going to ask is, what role does identity play and how you photograph your subjects, whether it's talking about your identity or the identity of the subjects that you're photographing? And based on that, how do you gain genuine trust from the communities that you document? And please let me know also if you would like to use any of the photos that you submit. I know you haven't had a chance to actually show any of your photos yet, so if you
Oh,
like, you're more than welcome to.
sure. I can throw a picture up here during my conversation for visual appetite. Do you all see that picture?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think the discussion has been great so far. I've loved hearing from academia and also hearing from folks working in the field. It's good to kind of hear different perspectives. Just really quickly gonna answer the questions that were presented. So I think the best way to understand your role and your identity playing in photographs is to look within and understand that we all have bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious. We grew up in environments that gave us bias, and that's okay. You're not a bad person, right? I think that if you're able to self-acknowledge your bias, that you're actually more approachable. Someone's going to be more willing to talk to you because you're able to understand, like, I see this way, and maybe this is right or wrong. Let's have a discussion about that. And just to, I know you all are journalists, you all know this, but bias is based on race, gender, class, able-bodied, age, body type, religion, and how people perceive you as an outsider or foreigner. In addition to checking your bias, you should understand your privilege, right? We all have privilege in America. Every single person is privileged in a way that someone is not. And I know when people think of privilege, they automatically think of gender and race, which are kind of the most obvious ones, but you can be privileged in the ability to physically give birth to a baby. You can be privileged in the fact that you can pay your bills on time. You could be privileged in the fact that you got a high school diploma because other people didn't get that, right? So just understanding that privilege isn't so, uh, it's not super obvious. It can be things that set you apart from other people, and that's okay. Also, again, it's okay to have a privilege that others don't have. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're able to understand that you're different than other people. And when you come together with someone, you have to know how that may affect your relationship. And I think it's important to be curious, communicate effectively, and seek clarification when you're photographing people. Ask questions about their cultures and customs, even if you think you already understand what's going on, you may not. And if there's someone in your newsroom that you can go to after you take a picture and maybe you want to ask them, hey, do you mind giving me feedback on this? Or how do you feel like this works with the story? Approach them in a way that's kind and generous, and don't take up too much of their time, and let them understand you just want to seek understanding, and you want to make sure your audience also understands what's going on. Inclusive visual storytelling, right? Photograph people with their dignity intact, in addition to holding up journalistic ethics. Always use empathy when capturing someone. As mentioned earlier, portraits, those are things you can pose. And if you are doing that, you can ask the person, how do you want to be seen, right? I do that all the time. I'm like, what is the emotion of the story? Like, you don't need to smile if you're sad in the story, right? I want you to embody what that story is. So asking people questions like that. I think it's important to know that everyone has a person in their life, their person or an animal that they hold near and dear to their heart. And the person in front of your camera is someone that somebody loves. So you need to treat them with dignity and with empathy, and know that, they want to be seen in the right light, right? And so few other things is visit the areas that are deemed underprivileged and poor, and just go there with no agenda. You know, go to a neighborhood park and ask someone what's the best, you know, lunch to get around there, and then go get lunch, you know. And in that way you're introducing yourself to that community, right? In that way, you know, you could, if the lunch was really good, you could leave a review, right? That's a that's a type of like commodity to that neighborhood, right? And it's something small and simple. And if you're, you know, not comfortable maybe going into that neighborhood, however you feel, like I'm not here to judge, you can also go to nonprofits working in that neighborhood and volunteer your time to see what's going on in that neighborhood. And that doesn't mean you, and I mean, there's that ethical standard of, well, you can't then photograph that nonprofit, but you can still understand what that community is going through, right? And I think that could be something to help you venture into a community where maybe there is a story you know that needs to be told, and maybe people may see you as an outsider. So creating that community or even that genuine curiosity, right, is important with just showing up without a camera. You don't have to always be taking pictures. You can just go and be a human first. Always talk to the person, always get the 5 W's in the H, go the extra mile and get a quote if you're going to take a picture of someone. Like, you know, if the story is it's a hot day, go take a picture of what that looks like. Talk to the person and say, you know, how hot did you feel like it was, or how did you get through the day, and add some character, right? We may not be able to hear that person, but those words can give more in depth of what that picture is trying to say. And when you're done taking the picture and you have the time, bring a physical copy of the photograph or even the newspaper. I know the AJC is about to stop printing, so that will end soon. But if you can bring them a physical copy of the picture, that grows trust. That grows integrity, right? You came back, you didn't just take the picture and run away. And that way you can build a relationship. So if something does happen again in that neighborhood, right, you already went to the lunch spot and they can say, oh, that's John. He left me a review, you know, about that lunch over there. He's been in the community before, right? Oh, that's Grace. All that great stuff. So don't perform empathy is the last thing I'm going to say. Like, be actually empathetic, you know, like understand who you are. Don't be ashamed. I think people are more willing to want to talk to you if you know where you are, where you stand in life, and you're more open to having that conversation. Really quickly, I'll talk about this picture. I was working at the AJC, I believe this is in 2017 or 2018, when the Confederate Avenue, which is now renamed to United Avenue, was being renamed. It was the day that Keisha Lance Bottoms, who was the mayor of Atlanta, signed the bill, and I was tasked to go take a picture of a street. I had no idea what was going on. I'm out there for hours walking around trying to make a picture because there is no photo. This is like, as you see, so these kids are coming off a school bus, right? So no one's truly outside. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing happening, but I wanted to get the sign, right? We talked about filling the frame. So we have the sign at the top of the picture that says Confederate, right? And so I walked past this, but again, nothing was happening. And then I saw the school bus coming down the street and I said, okay, right? I've scoped out a place. I do not know if kids are going to get off and walk past me, but I'm hoping that we can make this happen, right? This was a lot of patience, a lot of sweating, right? Waiting for the moment to happen, right? Sometimes you see elements come together in a picture, but you don't have that one necessary thing. It could be a human, it could be a dog, whatever you're looking for. And sometimes you just have to wait so long and you're like, will this work? And it did work, and it does not always work. And every time I look at this picture, I see something different. Like, I can't zoom in, but there's like a human walking a dog down the middle of the photo, really tiny, wearing a hat, which I didn't notice until I just pulled it up now. But I am proud of this picture. Did I like the way it ran? I did not, but that's okay. That's another story for another day. We're not here to talk about my feelings. But so filling the frame with work, like with elements. We've got the sign up top. We've got these young Black kids that just got off a school bus. They're on public space, and that's a question that'll come up. So I did take the picture on public space. There could be a question of talking to the parents, and we can get into that. But that's just an example of image I wanted to share. Because I didn't get their names, I did not go back and give the picture like I told you all. But I have met people who are like, I think I know these kids in XYZ. So if I do find them, I'm more than willing to give them a picture or just talk about why I took it in the first place. Because it was a kind of a historical day in Atlanta. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Hey, Alyssa, can I ask you something?
Yes.
So did it just happen that these kids had this sort of distrustful look on their faces?
It just happened because I was standing there like a weirdo at, 3 o'clock on a hot day, just waiting to take a picture. So yes, I think they were like, what is happening? Because they
Okay.
did
Yeah, I
not
just
know.
wondered.
Yeah, that was all. Who is this crazy lady standing on a brick ledge? That's what that face is.
I just want to say too before I continue with this section that it's just really amazing, how you were just able to stand out there, and commit to it as well, because it really just kind of touches on that element of immersing yourself within the community. And, I think it's really interesting too, the looks on their faces, because it does, say distrust, and it makes you, I'm sure they were questioning, like, what is she doing out here? And that's definitely something that we've talked on previously in, the other sections. But go ahead, Matthew.
Oh no, I was gonna wait till you get done. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. But yeah, there's a lot happening in that scene. But one of my favorite points you talked about, Alyssa, was just, immersing yourself in the community, making it less about the job and more so about connecting with the people and understanding the community, because that does build genuine trust. It allows people to understand that I'm not just here to get a story. I'm actually here to understand you and understand what's going on.
Yeah, and the more you immerse yourself in those communities, the easier your job gets, because you'll know where to go. People know who you are and understand why you're there. So like that image that Alyssa was sharing, a lot of images when you're doing when you're feature hunting and looking for photos like that on the street, at least half your frames you're gonna have somebody in the frame that's looking confused or distressful, because why is this person with a camera? But if you're in those spaces all the time with your camera, or even not with your camera, and the community knows you, um, like that doesn't happen just as much. Some people will just learn to kind of ignore you, or some people will be excited to see you, and that can add elements to your story if that's the type of story you're trying to tell.
Absolutely. I also wanted to take a moment real quick just to open the floor to questions, since this is still fresh and we just came off of the amazing example that Alyssa laid out for us. Are there any questions from our audience, or any additional questions that they would like to be asked at this time?
Right. As
Okay.
you all are thinking, really quickly though, I was just gonna say, going back to the food, like don't eat the food. Some newspapers do buy the food. So then if your newspaper bought the food, eat the food.
Respect. Hey y'all, happy Tuesday. I'm Julian Virgin. I've been on the call for the majority of the time. I was making dinner. I'm actually sitting at the table with my family, but I'm very appreciative of all the feedback that I've gotten this call. Alyssa, that photo is beautiful, by the way. Shout out to you. My question is, as a working journalist, I want to know what is the best way to work with and collaborate with photojournalists when we're out on assignment. Like, what works best for y'all? Because I'm big on collaboration. I want to make sure that I'm not just solely focused on what I'm doing, but also being very focused on the person who's grabbing the photos. So y'all please take it away and let me know, how do you like to interact with whatever journalist is on site with you? Thank you.
Julian, are you a writing journalist? Or are you a word journalist?
I'm a multimedia journalist. I work at WABE, Atlanta's NPR affiliate. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that,
But
and a
not
whole lot of
photos.
storytelling. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I use my camera video wise, but photo wise, I stay out of that, because I don't. Yeah, I kind of stay out the way from that. I
That's
do
my
work with Matthew Pearson. We work together. He's an incredible photojournalist. And whenever we are out on assignment, I always make sure I try to communicate, like, yo, what could I have done better to make your job more efficient? And I'm curious just about that flow, and I want to hear more from y'all about how you interact with another journalist that is on assignment, maybe doing a task.
To start, Julian, just keep your microphone out of my frame. As you know, I work with
Yeah,
radio journalists all the time, and that is my biggest challenge, is working around these microphones that they're trying to grab their audio. I've learned to kind of embrace it a little bit in some of our other kind of work. But as photojournalists, like, especially staff photographers for an outlet, like a lot of times we're writing on the trust that you built. We're coming into a situation that you've already established that trust. And that is such a privilege and honor. One of the photos that I actually had chosen for my example, I don't have it pulled up, but it's a portrait that I made. Ben, can you pull that up real fast?
Yeah, I got you. I'm sorry about that.
Because this is a great example of that, where I wasn't there present for the interview because I had to be covering. This was the night of the debates in Atlanta, so I covered Trump's arrival. Then I was at Biden's watch party for that, and then the next afternoon I went to Carl's house to make the photo that Ben's going to try to pull up in a second. I had about 20 minutes with him, which is not a lot of time to develop a relationship with someone. So I was writing off of the trust and the just the coattails of Sam Greenglass, who was our amazing politics reporter and is now a congressional reporter for NPR up in DC. But like this image was made in about 20 minutes. The story was about Carl, who is an undecided voter and was watching the debates to see if it was going to sway his perspective and how he was going to vote at all. So driving up to his house, knowing I had a limited time, I was thinking about how I was going to compose it, what was I going to do, and I came up with this idea of, clearly the caption's going to say, Carl's posing for a photo the day after the election or the day after the debate, because I wasn't there for the moment. This is an example of late photography in kind of a way. So on the way there, I was like, well, what if I just had him lit up by the TV? If we pulled up the replay, had him lit up by the TV and, kind of had those the elements in frame. And when you really think about it, I showed up to this man's house. I couldn't even remember his name because I had no time. I was jumping between assignments and stuff, and go, hey, are you, check my phone, Carl? And yeah, you're Carl. I was, can we go down into your basement where you watch the debate, turn off all the lights and just turn on the TV? And, me being a perfect stranger to him and him like agreeing to that is such a bizarre thing to think about when you think about what our jobs are. And the only reason why that happened is because Sam had spent weeks conversing with him and talking with him beforehand, to the point where he was comfortable with knowing that, hey, if Sam's going to send this person to me, this person's going to do a great job of helping tell my story. And I wish I had more time with Carl, because he actually was a really interesting person to talk to about things. But this is the photo that we ended up making together. And that's also how I approach portraits with someone, is like, this is something we're collaborating and making together. I'm not going to pose you. I want you to adopt a body language that you're comfortable with. And I might offer some guidance if it looks awkward or uncomfortable, or if it looks inaccurate to what story we want to tell together. But all that's about establishing that trust and writing off of the trust that was already built by the reporter that was doing that work.
Thank you. This is a great picture, by the way, Matthew. I was looking at it when you know, giving me your submissions for photos, and there's just a lot that can be told in just his body language and the expression on his face too, juxtaposed with what's happening on the screen. There's so much that can be depicted from that too. I just think it's really interesting that you're able to catch him in that moment, to be able to capture this picture, because it could say a lot about multiple things. It could say so much about the political scene. It could say a lot about him as an individual. And I think it really speaks to him as an individual, the fact that he allowed you to come into that space, in a space of politics where that's such a polarizing thing too. So to be able to capture that scene, that what was happening in this picture is, it's really, there's a lot to unpack with it. But I appreciate you for having this picture to be able to share, especially when we're talking about just this section on responsibility as a photojournalist.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, a well-composed photo that tells a lot of stories. I was like, well, what's a situation that I have been in where I have to make a portrait that tells a story, but I wasn't there for the scene of when it happened? How do we recreate that in a way that's honest and ethical and clear and also effective? And this just kind of captures all of that in so many kinds of ways. And a big part of that's also like what Alyssa talked about having those conversations about, we want to show how you feel. Like, if you're not supposed to be, if you don't feel like you should smile, don't smile. Like those kinds of conversations. I often ask them to, reporters, their job is to give the facts. Our jobs are to show why someone should care about those facts and to bring that humanity back to the journalism in a way. And so I encourage them to reflect on their feelings of what conversation they had with me, what just the situation and the story in general, and allow those to slowly bubble up. And that's going to show the story much more effectively than any kind of guidance or posing that I can ever give. And part of that's just because I'm an awkward guy that has a hard time saying things sometimes. So yeah.
Absolutely. I see that you're unmuted, Dylan. Would you like to go ahead and share? Is there anything on your mind, especially talking about this third section?
Yeah, sure. So, Julian, the other thing that I would say is just remember that you guys are a team and that you should work together as a team. And that means like practical things, like if, a photographer, if you're going to a spot new situation and the photographer might need to jump out of the car and run to get to something, maybe you should drive so that you can park and Matthew can jump out and start making pictures. But also take care of each other. I'm not saying be best friends, but know that as journalists, we're in an interesting job where we encounter people on the worst day of their lives every single day. And so we have to see a lot of things. I mean, we're kind of that front line to history. We can see really great things, but it seems like more often than not, especially if you're working in a large metro area, you're seeing really bad things on a daily basis. So check in with each other. Make sure that you guys are okay. I don't know, split cigarettes. I smoked lots and lots of cigarettes with the crime reporter in New Jersey because we saw lots of bad things every single day. And it was a not a great way to cope, but it was a way to cope and to talk through the days, the things that we had seen. And then, yeah, like Matthew said, just get out of the way. You're in the picture all the time. Quit it. Just move.
Can I just really quickly add something, Ben? I know we can probably get to other questions. I just wanted to say that it's helpful to go to an assignment when the person knows that I'm there to photograph something that's going to happen. Earlier, Dylan was talking about how he went to an assignment and the person was just like, all right, what do you want me to do? Right? As a reporter, if you know that you're telling a story about a man who washes dogs, do not have me go out on a day where he's not washing dogs, right? I want to go when he's washing dogs because he knows I'm here to photograph him washing dogs. And that's a communication thing, right? I want to be there when something is happening, not where he's like, well, I can pretend to wash a dog. Like I can call up a client. So it's helpful to know as the reporter, the photographer wants to photograph things as they happen. So a good question to figure that out is to ask the person, what is your schedule like this week? What are you doing on Tuesday? Are you washing a dog on Tuesday? Can the photographer come photograph you as you wash your dog? That's helpful because I don't want to have to create something that's not happening. And it's a simple question and it's very helpful. It's definitely photo editors do. Like if you had a photo editor, they would kind of be the point for that, right? They would make sure that's happening. Most newsrooms kind of consolidated that role. So that's just a helpful tip for you. Like definitely make sure something is happening so that when I get there, we can make that happen.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's important too, because people have other things going on in their lives too, and just making sure that you have the authenticity in the picture is very important because you can see the story in people's eyes too, especially in a picture. Like we've seen that with the examples that Christina has pulled up, and there's just so much that can be. There are certain things that you really just can't fake. You really just have to be there, like at that decisive moment. And a lot of times that includes connecting with the person or the community that you're trying to capture in a particular image or a scene for whatever assignment that you're there for.
I have a question. Very practical one. And Julian spoke or asked about collaboration, and you all chimed in a little bit between sort of the writer, the videographer, the photographer. not every writer, I would say mostly, has sort of the luxury to go out and do a story with a photographer, with a videographer, especially freelancers, and especially in times of shrinking budgets, right? So, and I see it more and more that writers go out, they have to take photos themselves, they sometimes have to take video themselves, and they struggle with it because that's often not what they grew up with, what they were trained to do. But also, if they take funky selfies, that's a different skill set, maybe. I mean, in addition to cleaning the camera, the lens, Christina, but it's a different skill set. So I would like to ask all of you just one very, very simple, basic piece of advice for writers who go out and have to take decent pictures, what to watch out for. And you touched on several issues, but maybe you have just some basic advice for just the writer people among us.
I think don't take a photograph, make a photograph. So be much more, it's not your everyday snapshot. I don't know how you do it, right? But I think if you're thinking about making a photograph, you become much more active in looking, possibly.
A practical thing for me, as mentioned earlier, was definitely clean your lens. If you look at the bottom of your iPhone, if you're shooting with an iPhone, there's usually the number 0.5, 1, 2, and 3. So those are the actual lenses on the back of your camera. I suggest not to toggle in between and zoom because then it gets pixelated because it's not using that specific lens. So if you're going to take a picture, use the 0.5, the 1, the 2, and the 3. If you're not close enough with that 3, the best lens is your feet. You're going to walk closer to that. I know Summer earlier talked about the elbow. I know you're probably juggling multiple things, but you always want to kind of crop in camera when you take a picture so you don't have to do it afterwards, which means try your best. Like, I know you're probably, I don't know what your role is at where you work, but if you're radio, I know, or you're writing, I know you're doing multiple things. But if you're able to put your reporter book down or your microphone down and just step back, you can definitely use a zoom lens for sure. But if you don't have access to that, your feet are your best zoom lens. Summer, you can just get as close as you can to the thing, right? And crop in camera so you don't have to crop afterwards. And I did think about most of the folks here maybe being on the reporter side. So I'm glad this question came up because I do know there aren't a lot of, I've met so many people in the field here that are like, we don't have a photographer. Like, what do I do? So I think that is helpful. Just move your feet, use the 1, 2, or the 3 on your camera. Don't pinch to zoom because that makes the photo more pixelated. And if you are going to take a portrait, put someone in the shade outside, right? Don't put them in the broad sunlight, put them in the shade. Hopefully your camera's on auto and it can help you with the lighting. Those are just things that came to mind really quickly.
Yeah. Also, if you're using your phone, a lot of times it will have I don't know if that will actually show or not, but it'll have the grid on there. Use that grid to kind of help guide placement, the rule of thirds, where that grid intersects those points right there are a great place to place your subject or a point of interest because that's a part of the frame that our eyes find pleasing. And like just move around, try different angles. Like if you're low, that's okay. If you're like if you're a radio reporter and you're stuck in a big scrum and you're crouched down and having to reach your microphone up, that's actually going to be a more interesting that could be a more interesting angle. So even if you don't feel like you're in the prime spot, try to make a photo. It might end up being really neat and different and unique. If not, try to get up and move around, try from above, try from below, try from the side. Don't be afraid to move around and experiment with what you're doing.
Yeah, and I tell my introduction students that every great photograph has at least one of 4 things: light, color, composition, and moment. And not every great photograph is going to have all of those, but it will have at least one of them. So when we think about light, we want our subject to be illuminated. We want the viewer's eye to go to probably their face first. When we talk about color, somebody mentioned earlier complementary colors, and a colorful photograph can create a lot more energy and dynamism to a stale image. And then composition, rule of thirds is great, symmetry is great, layers, lines, perspective, all of these are great things to kind of practice. And finally, moment. And we go back to the Henri Cartier-Bresson photograph, this decisive moment, this point of maximum tension in an image where it's this, will he fall into the puddle or will he not fall into the puddle? Or maybe it's a smaller moment like the Dorothea Lange photograph, this kind of looking off into the middle distance, this idea of, is life going to get better? That's the moment. So every great photograph is going to have one of those four things, or at least one of those four things. So that's what I would focus on if I was a beginner.
Absolutely. And just to quickly tack on to that, and Ben, if you actually want to pull up my other photo as an example of this, like, for me, when I'm approaching things, the most important thing is always that authenticity. Like, getting the candid moment and the authentic moment is going to be a lot more powerful than a staged moment at any moment. And the photo that Ben will show up eventually in a second here is from the protests on the Emory Quad from last year. I showed up on the scene and did not expect things to devolve in the way that it did as fast as it can. So this photo is like way blown out. It's a lot hotter than I want it to be when it comes to the highlights. But this photo won an award. This photo went viral because it's an authentic, candid moment of the chaos that was happening, the struggle between these protesters and the Georgia State Patrol that just showed up and started carrying them away. So don't stress as much about the technical part of it if you're not familiar with that. Focus on grabbing what's true.
There's just a lot. You weren't kidding when you said there was a lot happening.
Oh yeah, I was
like 10 things off the top of my head just looking at this image that I see.
Yeah, I was turned around. This was behind me. I was underneath a tent taking a picture in the shade, and I heard the commotion start behind me. And as I turned around, I just flipped my aperture dial over to f8, let fate, and just started snapping away and got really fortunate. This is one of those photos that I didn't even know I had until I started filing, just because everything was happening around me really quickly. And that muscle memory of being intentional with composition from just practice, beforehand, that all kind of helped kick in to make this into what it was, even though it's not a perfect image.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at it. Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot happening here. And it really does hit those 4 points that were just discussed too. Like, in some shape or form, it really hits those 4 points. So I think it really, this is a great example of a photo that really touches on, intentionality, just being in the moment rather than, trying to, it's about making the photo rather than taking the photo, as Christina had said. Thank you for sharing, Matthew. Okay, the floor is actually open if we have any additional questions. I know there's been questions that have been dispersed between each section that we've gone over, but if we have, for our closing, any final questions, whether it's about the things we've talked on, any personal questions for our panelists, or any feedback, just anything that would like to be put out there.
Well, I just have an observation about that last photo. This is kind of off the wall. It just reminded me of a certain type of medieval painting where there's a million people in the painting and they're each doing something different. There's so much action. Anyway, that's all.
Yeah,
It was a great picture, great photo.
Having the Google alerts, one of my greatest compliments I feel like I always get is if one of my photos end up on Reddit in the accidental Renaissance subreddit. That's when I'm like, yeah, I did a great job when that happens.
Right. It's a great photo, though. I mean, it's great in the sense to where it just tells a story, and it tells so much of a story between the things focusing on, the race in the scene, the background, the privilege, all these different things just combined in this image right here.
Which is funny because I was so angry when I was filing and I saw this photo and then I was blown out in like, if you're looking at the trooper to the left, that should be a darker blue than what it really is right there. I was so mad that I messed this photo up. And a few days later, like seeing it go viral and be taking off allowed me to, not be as a harsh critic on me and helped me embrace that idea of the candid moment is more important than nailing all the techniques.
Yes.
I think that's a big sign of maturation as a photographer. The technical, while important, is less important than the content. I think that that's something that we all could really learn a lot about as photographers.
Absolutely, Dylan.
And there's a whole there's lots of photo philosophy writing if you're talking about studium and punctum, and if the studium of a photograph is literally what it shows, the punctum is something else. It's this idea that it means to pierce, and it moves us in a way that is it's different and it's unique and it's individual. And a photograph that has punctum for you might not have punctum for me, and vice versa. And I think it really goes to this idea of moment as well. Moving photographs are personal, and they feel powerful to us, which is great.
They do. That's absolutely true. I know that we are actually at our time because I'm being very cognizant of the fact that it's Tuesday evening and everyone has their own things that they have going on, whether it's tonight or tomorrow. But I would like to just go ahead and say thank you to everyone who attended this panel this evening. Thank you to our actual panelists. You all did a fantastic job just breaking down the importance of photojournalism, especially in this digital age, and just touching on all the things that we might know in photojournalism, but we not actually think about to a great extent. So I just want to give my hat off to each of you and thank you for your time this evening to be able to share with us. Katja, do you actually have anything too? I wanted to thank you. Just wanted to make sure I'm not missing anything. So you all are certainly welcome to go ahead and reach out to me, to Katja, the SPJ president, and to our panel.
I'm sorry. I was still on
yeah, it just
mute
disappeared,
here.
but
Sorry about that. I
okay,
just
yeah.
brought up a quick slide here in case you all want to get in touch with our wonderful panelists here, or with us for any additional questions. I just have to say, wow, I'm amazed. This was a fantastic discussion. Also, I can only echo what Ben said. Thank you to our panelists for really allowing us a glimpse into your world and your work, and giving all of us also very actionable, practical advice. And I have to say, just for myself, and I'm very interested in photography, I'm a writer, but it's always been a big interest of me. I just learned a ton. And thank you all for asking fantastic questions, and Ben for putting this together, organizing it, and being an amazing moderator tonight. Please, if you're interested in any of our future programs, make sure to check out our website or follow us on social media. We have a couple other programs coming up. Or if you have any questions about membership, contact spjgeorgia@gmail.com, or contact any of us, Ben, myself, or any member of the SPJ Georgia board or the SPJ Georgia community. And yeah, this will be on the website in a couple of days. And let me just get this away from here. Am I still in screen share here?
Nothing's visible if you are sharing your screen. Gotcha.
Okay, you didn't see the
It was there briefly and then it disappeared. It did come up. That's why I had actually shared. If anyone would like to be in contact, they're welcome to reach out to either myself, you, or our panelists that spoke tonight.
Okay. I thought, man, I thought I shared that. Whatever. Me and technology doesn't always work very well, so I apologize for that. But yeah,
This recording will be on the website, though, correct?
it will
So
be on the
access-
website, absolutely, with all the contact information in the next couple of days. So I will certainly watch this whole session again, because I learned so much. There was so much depth in here. Thank you all so very much. And that was a great session. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Ben, anything else you want to add?
No, you said the mouthful. Gotcha. I was just gonna, off the same vein, thank you very much, you all, for attending. Thank you to our panelists. Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
All have a
Ben.
great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. You all have a very safe evening. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.